Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The Intruder. Rain pounded against the roof of Ben Carson's modest home. It had been one of those days where the world seemed content to remind him how small he was. Another slow afternoon at the auto shop, bills piling up, and to top it all off, his old truck had refused to start again. So, when he heard a clatter in his garage well past midnight, irritation was his first response. Grabbing the nearest thing resembling a weapon, a rusty tire iron, he headed outside. The garage door was ajar, the padlock dangling broken. The fluorescent light inside flickered ominously, casting jagged shadows across the walls. "Whoever's in here, you'd better come out." Ben's voice wavered, a mix of bravado and genuine unease. A faint rustling came from behind a stack of old car parts. He moved closer, heart thundering in his chest. Suddenly, the pile shifted, and a figure slumped forward, landing on the cement floor with a soft grunt. Ben stumbled back, dropping the tire iron. What the? It wasn't human. The figure on the floor was tall, slender, and clearly alien. Her skin shimmered like liquid mercury, marred by dark bruises and gashes that oozed a viscous blue liquid. She looked up at him with large, luminous amber eyes, filled with equal parts fear and desperation. "Stay back," Ben stammered, reaching for his phone. "I am calling the authorities." "Please, no." The voice was faint but unmistakable. The alien, woman, spoke in a strange, lilting language. A metallic bracelet on her wrist hummed, and the words morphed into English mid-sentence. "Help me. They'll kill me." Ben froze, phone hovering above the call screen. "Who's gonna kill you? What even are you?" "No time. They'll find me. Please." Her head drooped, and she crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Ben stood there for what felt like an eternity, the storm outside raging on. Every instinct told him to get out, call the cops, let someone else handle this. But something about the way she had looked at him, utterly vulnerable, stirred a sense of responsibility he hadn't felt in years. Muttering curses under his breath, he knelt beside her and checked for signs of life. Her breathing was shallow, her silvery skin unnaturally cold to the touch. Ben noticed a jagged device embedded in her side, blinking erratically. "Well crap," he muttered. "Guess I'm a medic now." Ben worked quickly, drawing on years of patching up cuts and bruises from his clumsy auto shop escapades. The alien's physiology was nothing like a human's, but he figured bandaging a wound couldn't be too different. He removed the device with a pair of pliers, eliciting a pained gasp from her. It looked like some kind of tracker. "Great," Ben groaned. "If they're tracking you, they probably know you're here." He tossed the tracker into an old coffee can and shoved it in the farthest corner of the garage, hoping to buy time. Lyra's eyes fluttered open as he finished wrapping her wound. "Why, help," she whispered. Ben hesitated. "Honestly, I have no idea. Maybe I just don't like the idea of anyone getting hunted down and killed." A faint smile crossed her lips. "Thank you." Before he could respond, a deafening roar shattered the stormy silence. A bright beam of light swept through the windows, accompanied by the hum of an approaching craft. Ben's stomach dropped. "I'm guessing that's them." Lyra staggered to her feet, her movements slow but deliberate. "They can't take me alive," she said, her voice firm despite the pain. "Hold on." Ben grabbed her arm, his mind racing. "What are we supposed to do? Fight a spaceship with a tire iron?" Lyra pointed to the device he had removed. "If they detect no life signs, they'll leave." Ben stared at her, horrified. "Are you saying I need to kill you?" "That's not happening." She shook her head, a weak laugh escaping her lips. "No. Induced stasis. Temporary. Trust me." "Lady, I don't even know your name, let alone how your biology works." "Lyra," she said, pressing a glowing crystal into his hand. "Follow my instructions." The next 10 minutes were a blur. Under Lyra's direction, Ben used the crystal to activate some kind of neural inhibitor. It was the most terrifying thing he'd ever done, watching her body go limp, her breathing stop entirely. He placed her in the corner, covering her with a tarp just as the sound of boots echoed outside the garage. The door burst open, revealing two figures clad in sleek, black armor. Their helmets glowed with eerie red slits, scanning the room. One of them pointed a weapon at Ben. "You," the larger one growled in a guttural voice. "Have you seen this fugitive?" Ben glanced at the hologram they projected, a perfect image of Lyra. He forced a confused expression. No. What is that, some kind of movie prop?" The smaller bounty hunter hissed, stepping closer. "Scans show no life forms other than this human. She's not here." "Waste of time," the larger one snarled. With a final glance around, they retreated, their ship roaring as it ascended into the stormy sky. Ben slumped against the wall, heart pounding. What the hell did I just get myself into? When Lyra finally woke hours later, she was weak but alive. Ben handed her a cup of water, his hands still shaking. You've got a lot of explaining to do. Lyra met his gaze, her amber eyes softening. You saved my life. I'll tell you everything. But the way she hesitated told Ben that whatever everything was, it would change his life forever. The fugitive's truth. The rain had stopped by the time Lyra spoke again. Pale sunlight filtered through the cracks in the garage door, illuminating her still bruised form. She sat on the workbench, sipping water from a chipped mug Ben had thrust into her hands. He leaned against his tool chest, arms crossed, trying to process everything. You've got a lot of nerve breaking into my garage, dragging me into this intergalactic nightmare, Ben said, his tone sharp but not without curiosity. Start talking. Who are you and why are a bunch of space mercenaries hunting you down? Lyra winced as she set the mug down. I told you my name is Lyra. I was, part of the Zarathian High Council, a governing body overseeing dozens of systems. Ben raised an eyebrow. Sounds fancy. Why'd you quit? Bad office politics? A shadow crossed her face. Not exactly. I was framed. They accused me of treason and conspiring with the Draenix Syndicate, a notorious criminal network. It's a lie, of course, but the council doesn't tolerate even the perception of betrayal. Ben frowned. Why would they frame you? What did you do to piss them off? Lyra hesitated, her hands curling into fists. I discovered something dangerous. The council is hiding plans to launch a preemptive strike on Earth. Ben's stomach flipped. Earth? What did we do to deserve that? It's not what you've done, it's what you could do. Lyra's amber eyes locked onto his, her expression unreadable. Humans are an anomaly in the galaxy. Rapid technological advancement, relentless adaptability, and, well, your unpredictability. The Council sees you as a threat to their control, even though your species hasn't reached interstellar travel yet. Ben let out a bitter laugh. So they're scared of us because we might get good at space stuff? Sounds like a paranoid ex-boyfriend. It's deeper than that, Lyra said, her voice firm. Humanity's potential is unique. The Council believes if Earth joins the galactic community, it could destabilize their rule. I tried to oppose the strike, argued that peaceful contact was the better course. That's when they turned on me. Ben absorbed this, his fingers tapping nervously against his arm. And now you're here, hiding in my garage, hoping I can protect you from armored goons with ray guns. Do I look like a superhero to you? You didn't have to save me, Lyra countered. But you did. That tells me you're not as ordinary as you think. Ben sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine. Let's say I believe you. What's the plan? You can't just hang out here forever. They'll come back. Lyra glanced at the makeshift bandage on her side. I need to heal first. Once I'm strong enough, I can access my ship. It's hidden nearby. With it, I can gather evidence to clear my name and expose the Council's plans. Ben groaned. Of course there's a secret spaceship. Where exactly is it? About 3 miles from here, Lyra said. Buried under a field. But it's cloaked and the power core is depleted. I need time to recharge it. Great, Ben muttered. So we're sitting ducks until then? Lyra's gaze softened. I didn't mean to involve you, Ben. If you want me to leave, I'll go. But know this. If the Council succeeds, Earth will be obliterated before your people even realize they're under attack. Ben stared at her, weighing his options. He could throw her out, wash his hands of the whole mess, and pretend none of this ever happened. But something about her story, about her desperation, struck a chord. Maybe it was the quiet strength in her eyes or the way she spoke about humanity's potential, as if she believed in it more than most humans did. All right, he said finally. You can stay. But we need ground rules. First, no more glowing alien stuff where anyone can see it. My neighbors already think I'm weird. Second, you do what I say, no running off and getting yourself killed. Lyra smiled faintly. Agreed. For the next few days, Ben helped Lyra recover. He brought her food and water, made sure her wounds stayed clean, and even let her crash on the couch in his small living room. In return, Lyra shared fragments of her world, a galaxy teeming with life, some friendly, some hostile. She spoke of Zarathian cities that floated in clouds of iridescent gas and planets where the oceans shimmered like diamonds. Ben listened, fascinated despite himself. But the more he learned, the more the weight of her situation sank in. This wasn't just some alien spy thriller. This was real, and it had stakes far bigger than his quiet little life. One evening, while Ben was tinkering with an old engine block in the garage, Lyra joined him, her movements steadier now. She watched him work for a moment before speaking. "You're good at this," she said. Ben snorted. "Fixing cars? Yeah, it's about the only thing I'm good at." "It's more than that," Lyra said, her voice thoughtful. "You're resourceful. Creative. Those are traits the Council fears." Ben glanced at her. "You keep saying stuff like that. Like we're some kind of super species. But honestly, humans screw up a lot. We're not exactly united or peaceful." Lyra smiled. "Neither are most species in the galaxy. What makes humanity different is your resilience. You don't give up, even when the odds are against you." Ben shrugged, unsure how to respond. "Guess we'll see if that's enough to get us through this mess." Later that night, the peace shattered. Ben was jolted awake by the sound of his dog, a scrappy mutt named Tucker, barking furiously. Lyra was already up, her glowing bracelet humming faintly. "They're here," she said, her voice tense. Ben grabbed the tire iron again, cursing his lack of better weapons. "Oh, I thought we got rid of that tracker thing." "They must have triangulated residual energy from my ship," Lyra said. "They're closing in." Ben peeked out the window and saw the faint glow of lights in the distance. A sinking feeling settled in his gut. "What do we do?" Lyra's expression hardened. "We fight." "You're joking, right?" Ben said. "They've got tech that makes your fancy bracelet look like a toy." Lyra activated the bracelet, projecting a shimmering shield around her arm. "I can handle their weapons. You just need to hold them off long enough for me to get a signal to my ship. It might be able to assist." Ben stared at her, torn between terror and reluctant admiration. "Fine. But if we survive this, you owe me answers, and a hell of a lot more than that." Lyra's lips curved into a small, determined smile. "Deal?" As the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, Ben tightened his grip on the tire iron, silently praying that humanity's famed resilience would live up to its reputation. The standoff. Ben tightened his grip on the tire iron as the garage seemed to shrink around him. Lyra stood beside him, her shimmering shield humming softly in the dark. Outside, the glow of alien lights flickered through the rain-soaked night, growing closer with each passing second. "Okay," Ben whispered, his voice tense. "This is officially the dumbest thing I've ever done. You sure about this fight plan?" "No," Lyra admitted, her voice low and steady. "But we don't have a choice." Ben glanced at her, incredulous. "You're supposed to be the one with the advanced alien tech. I've got a rusted tool and an adrenaline problem." Lyra held up her bracelet, the shield rippling with faint energy. "It's not much, but it'll buy us time. You need to draw them into the garage. The tighter the space, the harder it is for them to maneuver." "Great," Ben muttered. "So I'm the bait?" Lyra shot him a wry look. "You said you wanted answers. This is how you earn them." Before he could respond, a deep, metallic voice boomed outside the garage. "We know you're in there, fugitive. Surrender now or face annihilation." Ben's heart sank as a new sound joined the night, the whirring, unmistakable hum of charging weapons. "Fantastic," he said. "They brought the big guns?" Lyra motioned for him to stay back as she crouched by the window, peeking through the edge of the curtain. "2 bounty hunters," she murmured. "Standard Zarathian shock rifles. They're lethal but unwieldy in close quarters." Ben's brow furrowed. "How do you know that?" "I've fought them before," Lyra said. She glanced at him, her expression sharp. "Are you ready?" Ben exhaled slowly, his pulse thundering in his ears. "No. But let's do this anyway." The first move came suddenly. A brilliant beam of light cut through the garage door, slicing it cleanly in two. Sparks flew as the top half crumpled to the ground, revealing 2 armored figures silhouetted against the stormy night. Fugitive Lyra, one of them intoned, his voice cold and mechanical. "You have been sentenced to termination. Any resistance is futile." "Yeah, well, so is your fashion sense," Ben shouted before he could stop himself. Both bounty hunters turned toward him, their glowing helmets narrowing like eyes locking onto prey. One raised his rifle, aiming directly at Ben. "Now?" Lyra hissed. Ben darted behind a workbench as the rifle fired, a crackling bolt of energy obliterating the spot where he'd just been standing. Lyra surged forward, her shield shimmering as it deflected another blast. The air sizzled with heat and ozone as she closed the gap between herself and the hunters. "Over here, tin can!" Ben yelled, hurling a wrench at the smaller hunter. The tool clanged harmlessly against the armor, but it was enough to distract him. The hunter turned, giving Lyra the opening she needed. She swung her shielded arm upward, slamming it into the weapon. The rifle flew out of the hunter's hands, clattering to the ground. "Nice shot," Ben called, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Lyra or himself. The larger hunter advanced, firing another blast that narrowly missed Ben's head. He ducked behind an old engine block, muttering every curse he knew under his breath. "Why didn't I just stick to fixing cars?" Lyra was a blur of movement, her shield deflecting shots as she fought to keep the bounty hunters at bay. But even Ben could see she was tiring. Her injuries slowed her down, and her strikes lacked the force they needed to disable her attackers completely. "Ben," she shouted, her voice strained. "The signal booster, it's in the toolbox. Get it to me?" Ben scanned the chaotic garage until he spotted the toolbox in question. It was across the room, near the wall where the smaller hunter was regaining his weapon. "Of course it's over there," Ben grumbled. Summoning every ounce of courage, or recklessness, he sprinted for the toolbox, dodging debris and stray energy blasts. The hunter noticed him too late. Ben slid across the floor, snatching the small, glowing device from the toolbox and hurling it toward Lyra. "Heads up." Lyra caught the booster in one smooth motion, slamming it into her bracelet. The shield around her arm flared brighter, and a pulse of energy rippled outward, throwing both hunters off balance. "What was that?" Ben asked, half yelling over the ringing in his ears. "Short-range EMP," Lyra explained, her voice ragged. "It'll disrupt their systems for a minute. We need to move, now." Ben helped her to her feet as the hunters struggled to recover. Together, they dashed out of the garage, heading toward the woods behind the house. Rain lashed at their faces, and the ground turned to slippery mud beneath their feet. "How much time do we have?" Ben panted. "Not enough," Lyra replied grimly. "The EMP won't hold them for long. We need to reach my ship." Ben groaned. "You're really banking on this ship, huh?" "It's our only chance," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The woods were dark and disorienting, but Lyra seemed to know the way. She led Ben through a winding path until they reached a small clearing. At first glance, it looked empty, but Lyra tapped her bracelet and the air shimmered. Suddenly, a sleek, metallic craft materialized before them, its surface gleaming faintly even in the dim light. Ben's jaw dropped. "That's your ship? It looks like a freaking sports car for aliens." Lyra ignored him, pressing her hand against the ship's hull. A panel slid open, revealing a glowing console. "Get inside," she ordered. Ben hesitated. "What about the bounty hunters? They'll follow us?" "They won't get the chance," Lyra said, her fingers flying across the console. The ship hummed to life, lights flickering as its systems powered up. "Once we're airborne, they'll be outmatched." A loud crash from behind them cut off any further discussion. The hunters had recovered and they weren't wasting time. Energy blasts tore through the trees, one narrowly missing Ben's head. "Inside. Now," Lyra shouted. Ben scrambled into the ship, his heart pounding. Lyra followed, slamming the hatch shut just as another blast hit the side of the craft. "Hold on," she yelled, taking the controls. The ship roared to life, lifting off the ground in a sudden surge of power. Ben was thrown back into his seat as they shot into the sky, the bounty hunters' weapons firing uselessly behind them. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the hum of the ship's engines. Ben stared out the viewport, watching the earth shrink below them. "We made it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded, her expression grim. "For now." Ben turned to her, his curiosity overriding his exhaustion. "So, what happens next?" Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw the weight of her burden fully reflected in them. "We stop them," she said. "Together." Ben leaned back, a humorless laugh escaping him. "Yeah, because that's exactly what I signed up for." But even as he said it, he knew there was no turning back now. Against the odds. The ship's engines roared as Lyra guided the sleek craft skyward. Lights on the console blinked in a synchronized dance, displaying diagnostics and alien symbols that Ben couldn't decipher. He remained strapped into the co-pilot's seat, white-knuckled and breathing hard, his head swimming from adrenaline and disbelief. The rain-soaked countryside faded into darkness below as the craft ascended through the clouds. The vibration steadied as Lyra engaged some kind of stabilizer, her hands moving fluidly over the controls. "I can't believe we're in the air," Ben muttered, still gripping the armrests. "How is this thing even running? Didn't you say it was low on power?" "I said it was depleted," Lyra corrected, not taking her eyes off the console. "The booster you handed me rerouted enough energy to activate the emergency systems. It's not a full charge, but it's enough to escape, for now." "For now," Ben echoed sarcastically, leaning back. You keep saying that like it's supposed to make me feel better? Lyra glanced at him, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. Would you prefer I lie to you? Actually, yes. A little optimism wouldn't hurt. The faint smirk faded as Lyra's focus shifted back to the ship's readouts. She flipped a switch and a translucent holographic display appeared in front of her, showing a top-down map of the area. 2 red blips moved steadily across the screen, following their flight path. They're tracking us, she said grimly. Ben craned his neck to see. Those are the hunters? Lyra nodded. Their suits are equipped with long-range trackers. If they get close enough, they'll lock onto the ship. We can't outrun them for long, not in this state. Ben's stomach sank. So what's the plan? Lyra exhaled sharply, her fingers tightening on the controls. We'll have to disable their trackers before they catch up. Disable? How exactly do we do that? By outsmarting them, she replied, her tone clipped. And a bit of improvisation. Ben groaned. Improvisation. My favorite thing to hear when we're being chased by alien bounty hunters. Lyra pressed another series of buttons, and the ship's engines shifted to a lower, quieter hum. They began to descend, the craft gliding silently toward a dense forest at the edge of a mountain range. Are you seriously landing? Ben asked, incredulous. Isn't the whole point of a spaceship to stay in space? They won't expect us to land, Lyra said. And we'll use that to our advantage. The ship touched down smoothly in a clearing, its lights dimming to near darkness. Lyra quickly unstrapped herself and grabbed a compartment from beneath the console, pulling out a small cylindrical device. She handed it to Ben. What's this? He asked, turning it over in his hands. A disruption grenade, she said. It emits an electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to disable their trackers. If you can get close enough. Ben's eyes widened. Wait me. You want me to sneak up on those guys with this? Lyra raised an eyebrow. You said you wanted to help? Yeah, I meant like moral support. Maybe throwing more wrenches. Ben, Lyra said firmly, her amber eyes locking onto his. You're resourceful. You're quick. And right now you're the only chance we have of pulling this off. Ben stared at her, his pulse pounding in his ears. He wanted to argue, to tell her this was insane, but something in her gaze stopped him. It wasn't just desperation, it was belief. She believed he could do this. Fine, he said finally, his voice shaky. What do I have to do? Lyra explained the plan quickly. The bounty hunters would follow their ship's energy signature to the clearing. Ben would circle around and plant the disruption grenade within range of their suits. The grenade had a delay mechanism, giving him just enough time to get clear before it detonated. Just enough time, Ben muttered under his breath as he crouched behind a fallen tree at the edge of the clearing. The rain had started again, soaking his clothes and making every step treacherous. He clutched the grenade in one hand, his heart hammering in his chest. The glow of the hunters' helmets appeared through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the ground. They moved with precision, their weapons raised and ready. Target located, one of them said, his voice echoing through the forest. Energy signature confirms the fugitive's craft. Ben glanced toward the ship, where Lyra waited inside, monitoring the situation through the holographic display. She had refused to let him go alone, insisting on keeping a line of communication open through a small earpiece. Ben, her voice came softly in his ear, steady but urgent. They're in position. Now's your chance. He swallowed hard and crept forward, keeping low to the ground. The hunter's attention was focused on the ship, their rifles scanning for movement. Ben's boots squelched in the mud, and he winced, freezing as one of the hunters turned his head slightly. Stay calm, Lyra's voice whispered. You're almost there. Ben exhaled slowly and kept moving, every step feeling like an eternity. Finally, he reached the spot Lyra had marked, a cluster of rocks just within range of the hunter's suits. He placed the grenade on the ground, activated the delay, and began to retreat. That's when his foot caught on a root. He stumbled, barely catching himself before he hit the ground. The noise, though faint, was enough to draw the hunter's attention. Movement detected, one of them barked, turning toward him. Ben's blood ran cold as the larger hunter raised his rifle, the weapon's barrel glowing ominously. Ben, run! Lyra shouted through the earpiece. Adrenaline surged through him as he sprinted back toward the ship, his breath ragged and his legs burning. A blast of energy seared past him, close enough to singe the air. The hunters were gaining, their armored suits tearing through the underbrush with ease. Lyra, any time now? Ben shouted. The grenade detonated. A brilliant pulse of light exploded behind him, followed by a high-pitched whine. Ben dove to the ground, covering his head as the shockwave rippled through the forest. The hunters' suits sparked and sputtered, their movements jerking erratically as their systems shut down. Systems compromised, one of them growled, his voice distorted. Ben didn't wait to see what would happen next. He scrambled to his feet and bolted for the ship, relief flooding him as the hatch opened and Lyra pulled him inside. "You did it," she said, a rare note of warmth in her voice. "Yeah," Ben gasped, collapsing into the co-pilot's seat. "Next time you're doing the sneaking." Lyra didn't answer, her focus already back on the controls. The ship lifted off, the engines humming steadily as they ascended into the stormy sky. As the forest disappeared below them, Ben let out a shaky laugh. "So what now?" Lyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Now we go on the offensive?" Ben blinked. "Offensive? Against the Council? I thought we were just trying to survive." "We can't run forever," Lyra said, her voice firm. "If we want to stop them and save your planet, we need to take the fight to them." Ben groaned, leaning back in his seat. "I should have stayed in the garage." Lyra smiled faintly. "You'd be bored by now." Despite himself, Ben chuckled. He wasn't sure how they were going to pull off this insane plan, but one thing was certain, there was no turning back now. Fugitive warrior partner. The hum of the ship's engines settled into a steady rhythm as Lyra angled them toward orbit. The dense, rain-filled clouds gave way to the infinite void of space, dotted with distant stars. Ben stared out the viewport, catching his breath as the adrenaline drained from his system. "Is this your first time leaving Earth?" Lyra asked, her tone lighter than usual. Ben snorted, still shaken. "Yeah, if you don't count those alien movies where people don't nearly get vaporized. Do humans normally survive run-ins with bounty hunters, or am I breaking records here?" "You're managing," Lyra replied, smirking slightly as she adjusted the ship's trajectory. Ben leaned forward in his seat, trying to make sense of the holographic display glowing in front of her. Alien symbols and charts scrolled across the interface, but one thing caught his eye, a blinking red indicator. "What's that?" Lyra stiffened. "A problem?" Ben groaned, slumping back into his seat. "Of course it is. Care to elaborate?" Lyra tapped the display, and a three-dimensional image of the ship appeared. A section of the hull blinked red, accompanied by a warning tone. The bounty hunter's EMP blasts must have weakened the ship's energy core. "We're leaking power?" Ben rubbed his temples. "I'm guessing duct tape won't fix that?" "It won't," Lyra said flatly. "If we don't repair it soon, we'll lose propulsion and life support." "Fantastic," Ben muttered. "So what's the plan? Do you have a space garage or something?" Lyra ignored his sarcasm and brought up a star map. She zoomed in on a nearby system, highlighting a small, barren planet. "There's a mining outpost here. Abandoned, but its equipment might still be functional. If we're lucky, we can scavenge what we need to stabilize the core." "If we're lucky," Ben repeated, sighing. "You really know how to sell it?" As the ship approached the desolate planet, Ben felt a mix of unease and wonder. The surface below was a patchwork of jagged rocks and deep canyons, illuminated by the faint glow of a dying sun. Lyra guided the ship into a steep descent, landing them near a cluster of weathered mining structures. "Stay close," she said, grabbing a small satchel filled with tools and weapons. "This place could be dangerous." Ben hesitated as he followed her to the hatch. "Define dangerous. Are we talking unstable buildings or more aliens who want to kill us?" "Both," Lyra replied without missing a beat. "Awesome," Ben muttered, stepping onto the rocky terrain. The air was thin and cold, biting at his skin as he surveyed the area. The mining outpost looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Rusted equipment lay scattered among the ruins, and the wind howled through the empty structures. Lyra led the way, her movements precise and confident despite the uneven ground. Ben couldn't help but admire her focus. For someone constantly hunted, she carried herself with an unshakable determination. "So," he said, trying to distract himself from the eerie surroundings. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Power cells," Lyra replied, scanning the nearest structure with a handheld device. "The mining equipment here should have used energy cores compatible with my ship." Ben peered into the structure's shadowy interior. "And what are the odds they're still here?" Lyra didn't answer, which wasn't reassuring. The first few structures yielded nothing but rusted debris and collapsed beams. Ben's frustration grew as they moved deeper into the outpost. "Are we sure this place isn't completely picked clean? Seems like a waste of—" He stopped mid-sentence as Lyra froze, holding up a hand for silence. "What?" Ben whispered, his pulse quickening. Lyra pointed toward a nearby structure, her eyes narrowing. We're not alone. Ben followed her gaze, squinting into the shadows. At first he saw nothing, but then a faint movement caught his eye, a figure darting between the ruins. Another bounty hunter? He asked, gripping a rusted pipe he picked up earlier. Lyra shook her head. Too small. Could be scavengers or worse. Worse? Ben repeated, but Lyra had already started moving, her blaster drawn. They crept toward the structure, their footsteps muffled by the rocky ground. As they approached, the figure emerged, a lanky insectoid creature with chitinous armor and sharp, spindly limbs. Its glowing eyes locked onto them and it let out a low, clicking growl. Oh great, Ben muttered. Alien spiders. My favorite. The creature lunged, its movements unnervingly fast. Lyra fired her blaster, the shot grazing its side and forcing it to retreat into the shadows. More clicking sounds echoed from the ruins, growing louder. There's more of them, Lyra said, her voice tense. We need to move. Now. Ben didn't argue, sprinting after her as the clicking grew into a cacophony. They ducked into a larger structure, barricading the entrance with a heavy beam. What are those things? Ben panted, his chest heaving. Predators, Lyra said, scanning the room. They've adapted to abandoned outposts like this. Opportunistic hunters. Fantastic, Ben said, gripping his makeshift weapon tighter. So what's the plan? Fight or run? Lyra's eyes landed on a row of cylindrical devices stacked against the far wall. Neither. We found what we need. The power cells were heavy, their surfaces covered in a layer of dust and grime. Ben helped Lyra load them into her satchel, his nerves on edge as the clicking grew closer. They're getting through, he said, glancing at the barricade. The wooden beam holding it in place was beginning to splinter under the weight of the creature's relentless assault. Keep moving, Lyra said, her voice calm but urgent. She handed him 2 of the power cells. We'll need these to make it back to the ship. Ben followed her through the structure, every sound amplifying his fear. The creatures were fast and coordinated, their glowing eyes appearing and disappearing in the darkness. As they reached the exit, one of the creatures dropped from above, landing between them and the way out. Lyra didn't hesitate, firing a precise shot that struck the creature in the chest. It screeched and collapsed, but the noise seemed to agitate the others. Run? Lyra shouted, and this time Ben didn't argue. The sprint back to the ship was a blur. The creatures swarmed around them, their claws scraping against the rocky terrain. Ben nearly tripped twice, his arms aching from the weight of the power cells. Lyra covered their retreat, her blaster firing in controlled bursts. They reached the ship just as the first of the creatures closed in. Lyra shoved Ben inside and slammed the hatch shut, sealing it with a quick command on her bracelet. Go, she yelled, taking the controls. Ben dropped the power cells and collapsed into his seat, gasping for air. The ship's engines roared to life, and they lifted off just as the creatures began clawing at the hull. The acceleration pressed Ben into his seat, but he managed a weak smile. Remind me never to question your plans again? Lyra shot him a sidelong glance, her lips twitching into the faintest hint of a smile. You handled yourself well? Yeah, well, I've always been good at running away, Ben said, leaning back with a relieved sigh. So, are we good now? Back in the clear? Lyra's expression grew serious as she examined the power cells. This is only a temporary fix. The real fight is still ahead. Ben groaned, running a hand through his hair. Of course it is. But even as he complained, a small part of him felt something unexpected, a spark of excitement. Against all odds, he was surviving this alien adventure. And somehow he wasn't ready to stop. The price of truth. The ship hummed steadily as Lyra installed the salvaged power cells into the energy core. The faint vibrations beneath Ben's feet felt reassuring, a sign they weren't about to plummet from the sky again. He leaned against the wall of the cramped engine room, watching Lyra work with meticulous precision. You know, he said, breaking the silence, for someone who's supposedly on the run, you're pretty good at staying alive. Lyra didn't look up, her focus on connecting the final cell. Survival is a skill. You learn fast when the alternative is death. Ben smirked. That's oddly inspirational. She finally glanced at him, her amber eyes narrowing slightly. Why are you still here, Ben? You could have stayed on Earth. Ben crossed his arms, leaning against the bulkhead. You make it sound like I had a choice. Those bounty hunters would have leveled my garage and probably the entire town just to get to you. Besides, he hesitated, searching for the right words. You don't leave someone to fight alone. Not if you can help it. Lyra's gaze softened, but only for a moment. She nodded curtly and turned back to the energy core. This will hold us for now. We can't afford to waste any more time. Once the repairs were complete, Lyra guided the ship to a safe distance from the mining planet. She brought up a holographic map of the galaxy highlighting a sector on the far edge. "This is our destination," she said, pointing to a faint star system. "A trading hub called Avarice. It's neutral territory, at least officially. The Council has less influence there, but it's still dangerous." Ben raised an eyebrow. "And why exactly are we going there?" "We need allies," Lyra explained. "Supplies. Information. If we're going to strike back at the Council, Avarice is the place to start." Ben let out a low whistle. "Strike back, huh? You don't do anything halfway, do you?" Lyra didn't respond, her expression unreadable. She set the ship on autopilot and turned to face him. "There's something you need to understand, Ben. This isn't just about me. It's about your planet, your species." "What are you talking about?" he asked, frowning. "The Council didn't send bounty hunters after me just because I'm a fugitive," Lyra said, her voice steady but heavy with meaning. "They're hunting me because of what I know." Ben leaned forward. "And what's that?" Lyra hesitated, her eyes flickering with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "The Council is planning to annex Earth." Ben blinked, the weight of her words sinking in. "Annex? You mean like, invade?" "Not with ships or armies," Lyra said. "With policy. Manipulation. They'll establish treaties, offer technology, promise prosperity. But it's a lie. Once they have control, they'll strip your planet of its resources and use your people as labor, or worse." A cold chill ran down Ben's spine. "Why would they do that? What's the point?" Lyra's expression hardened. "Power. The Council expands its influence by consuming weaker systems. Earth is rich in resources and strategically positioned. You're just the next target." Ben sank into his seat, his mind racing. It was too much to process, the idea that his world was just a pawn in some intergalactic game. "And you're fighting against that?" "I'm trying," Lyra said, her tone quieter now. "But I can't do it alone." Avarice came into view hours later, a sprawling station that glittered like a jewel against the black void of space. Dozens of ships orbited the hub, their designs ranging from sleek and modern to battered and patched. The station itself was a chaotic maze of interconnected modules, lit with neon signs and flashing beacons. Ben stared out the viewport, his apprehension growing. "This place looks lively." "It's a cesspool," Lyra said bluntly. "But it's also where we'll find what we need." As they docked, the ship's interior lights dimmed slightly. Lyra stood and checked the weapon holstered at her side. "Stay close and don't draw attention to yourself." "Right," Ben said, following her toward the hatch. "Blend in. Got it?" Lyra stopped and gave him a pointed look. "I mean it, Ben. Avarice is full of opportunists. If anyone suspects who I am, or what you are, it won't end well." Ben raised his hands in mock surrender. Message received. Silent and invisible. The air inside the station was thick with smoke and the mingling odors of exotic foods and unidentifiable chemicals. Crowds bustled through narrow corridors, their voices creating a constant hum of activity. Lyra moved through the throng with purpose, and Ben struggled to keep up. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice low. "To an old contact," Lyra said. "Someone who owes me a favor." The contact turned out to be a wiry alien with mottled green skin and multiple eyes. He sat behind a cluttered stall filled with weapons, gadgets, and other questionable items. When he saw Lyra, his expression shifted to one of wary recognition. "Lyra," he said, his voice a rasp. "Didn't expect to see you alive." "Disappointed?" she asked coolly. The alien chuckled, his many eyes darting to Ben. "And who's this? Your new partner?" "None of your concern," Lyra said. "I need information. The Council's movements in this sector." The alien leaned back, crossing his spindly arms. "That's a dangerous topic. Information like that doesn't come cheap." Lyra placed a small device on the counter. It pulsed with a soft blue light. "This should cover it." The alien's eyes widened. "A-phase disruptor core. Rare. Very rare." He picked it up and inspected it closely before nodding. "You've got a deal." The alien provided them with a data module containing detailed information about the Council's operations. As Lyra examined the data back on the ship, her expression darkened. "What is it?" Ben asked. "The Council has already dispatched envoys to Earth," Lyra said. "They're setting the stage for annexation." Ben's stomach dropped. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Lyra replied, her voice grim. "They'll start by offering technology and trade agreements. It'll seem harmless, beneficial even. But once the treaties are signed, it'll be too late. Ben clenched his fists, anger boiling inside him. So what do we do? Lyra looked at him, her gaze steady. We stop them. Expose their true intentions before they can manipulate your leaders. And how exactly do we do that? Ben asked. We're just two people against an entire intergalactic government. We're not alone, Lyra said. There are others who oppose the council. Rebels, dissidents. If we can rally them, we might have a chance. Ben nodded slowly, determination replacing his fear. Then let's get to work. Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile. Welcome to the fight, Ben. Allies in the shadows. The ship's lights flickered as Lyra set a course away from Avarice. The alien trading hub disappeared into the void, replaced by the distant glimmer of stars. In the cockpit, Lyra leaned over the controls, her posture tense. Ben sat behind her, fiddling nervously with a loose panel on his chair. So, we've got some dirt on the council and no real plan. You sure this is how revolutions are supposed to start? Lyra didn't turn. Revolutions start with people willing to fight, even when the odds are impossible. Ben rolled his eyes. Yeah, that's great on a motivational poster, but where are these people you're talking about? Lyra finally turned, her expression serious. We're meeting them. The rendezvous point was an asteroid belt deep in uncharted space. As they approached, the sensors lit up with multiple signatures, ships hidden among the rocks. Most were older models, heavily modified and bristling with weapons. Friends of yours? Ben asked, watching the vessels on the display. Some, Lyra replied, her tone guarded. Others, not yet. A message crackled through the comms. The voice on the other end was gruff and heavily accented. Unidentified vessel, state your business. This is Lyra Kane, she replied. I'm here to speak with Orlan. A pause, then the voice returned, sharper this time. Lyra Kane? You've got some nerve showing up here. Tell him it's urgent, she said, her voice calm but firm. And that I have information he'll want. The line went silent for an agonizing moment before the ships shifted, forming an escort around them. Follow the beacon. But if you try anything, you won't leave this belt alive. Ben swallowed hard. They sound friendly? Lyra ignored him, guiding the ship toward the beacon. They emerged into a clearing where a massive freighter floated, its hull scarred from countless battles. Docking clamps extended, locking onto their ship. Stay alert, Lyra said as they stepped into the airlock. These people don't trust easily. Great, Ben muttered. Neither do I. Inside the freighter, the air was heavy with tension. Armed guards flanked the corridors, their eyes narrowing as they passed. Ben felt like he was walking into a lion's den. They were led to a large chamber filled with mismatched furniture and flickering screens. At the center stood a tall, broad-shouldered alien with slate-gray skin and piercing violet eyes. Orlan. His presence was commanding, and the room seemed to quiet as he turned to face them. Lyra, he said, his deep voice carrying a mix of surprise and suspicion. I thought you were dead. Not yet, she replied. And I see you're still gathering strays. Orlan's lips twitched in a faint smile. Strays or allies, depends on who you ask. Why are you here? Lyra stepped forward, holding out the data module. Because the Council's next target is Earth. And if they succeed, it's only a matter of time before they come for you. Orlan took the module, his expression unreadable. You're asking me to fight a war. I'm asking you to survive, Lyra countered. If the Council consolidates its power on Earth, they'll become unstoppable. You know that as well as I do. Orlan studied her for a long moment, then gestured to one of his crew. The module was plugged into a terminal, and the data projected onto the screens. Maps, troop movements, and intercepted communications filled the room. A murmur spread through the assembled rebels as they absorbed the information. Orlan's expression darkened. You're right. This is worse than I thought. Then help me, Lyra said. We can't do this alone. Orlan turned to her, his gaze sharp. And what do you bring to the table, Lyra? The Council has an armada. We have scraps. Scraps can be deadly in the right hands, she replied. And I have something they don't? Orlan raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Lyra glanced at Ben, then back to Orlan. A human? The room fell silent. Ben froze, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him. A human? Orlan repeated, his tone skeptical. You brought one of them here? Ben stepped forward, trying to muster some confidence. Yeah, she did. And for the record, I'm not just one of them. My planet's the one on the chopping block, remember? So, yeah, I've got a stake in this. Orlan's gaze bore into him. And what do you bring to this fight, human? What makes you worth risking everything for? Ben hesitated, his bravado faltering. But then he straightened, meeting Orlan's eyes. I don't know, he admitted. But I'm here and I'm not running. That's gotta count for something. Orlan studied him for a moment longer, then let out a low chuckle. You've got guts. I'll give you that. He turned back to Lyra. All right. We'll help. But if this goes south, the blame is on you. Lyra nodded. I wouldn't have it any other way. Over the next few days, Ben saw firsthand the fractured unity of the rebels. They were a patchwork group of species and factions, each with their own grudges and agendas. But Lyra worked tirelessly to rally them, using every scrap of credibility and influence she had left. Ben found himself drawn into the preparations, helping wherever he could. He learned how to bypass alien security systems, repaired damaged equipment, and even trained with some of the rebel fighters. Though he felt out of place, he couldn't deny the growing sense of purpose. One night, as he sat in the ship's cargo hold tinkering with a faulty drone, Lyra joined him. You're adapting, she said, leaning against the wall. Had to, Ben replied, not looking up. Figured I might as well make myself useful. Lyra was silent for a moment. Then she said, thank you. Ben glanced at her, surprised. For what? For staying, she said. Most people would have run. Ben shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. Guess I'm not most people. As the rebels prepared for their first strike, Lyra revealed the target, a Council communication hub. Disabling it would disrupt their operations and buy time for Earth. The mission was risky. The hub was heavily guarded and the rebels had limited resources. But it was a chance they couldn't afford to pass up. On the eve of the mission, Lyra and Ben stood in the cockpit, staring out at the stars. You nervous? Ben asked. No, she said, then glanced at him. Are you? Terrified, he admitted with a laugh. But also kind of excited. Is that weird? Lyra smirked. A little. They fell into a comfortable silence, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on them. Finally, Lyra said, no matter what happens tomorrow, remember, you've already made a difference. Ben nodded, gripping the railing. And we're just getting started? The first strike. The rebel fleet drifted silently in the shadow of a massive asteroid, their ships powered down to avoid detection. Ben sat strapped into the co-pilot seat of Lyra's vessel, his stomach a tangle of nerves. Beyond the viewport, the Council communication hub floated like a spider in its web, surrounded by a defensive ring of automated turrets and patrol drones. Let me get this straight, Ben said, his voice low. We're going to sneak past all that, plant charges on the core, and escape before the whole place explodes? Essentially, Lyra replied, her tone far too calm for Ben's liking. Great, Ben muttered, gripping the armrests. Just making sure I didn't miss the part where this wasn't a suicide mission. Lyra smirked, adjusting the ship's controls. You'll be fine. Just stick close to me and don't try to be a hero. I'm not exactly the hero type, Ben shot back. I'm more of the guy who fixes things when the hero screws up. Then you're in the right place, Lyra said, her smirk fading as her gaze shifted back to the hub. We've only got one shot at this. The plan was as simple as it was dangerous. A small strike team would infiltrate the hub using stealth shuttles, disable the main defenses and plant explosive charges in the communication core. Meanwhile, the rest of the rebel fleet would remain on standby, ready to engage if things went sideways. As the strike shuttle approached the hub, Ben's heart pounded in his chest. Lyra piloted with precision, weaving through the debris field and avoiding the patrols. The other members of the team, a mix of hardened rebels and mercenaries, sat in tense silence, their weapons at the ready. When the shuttle docked with the hub, Lyra turned to Ben. Stay close. If we get separated, head back to the shuttle and wait for me. Ben nodded, swallowing hard. Got it? The airlock hissed open, revealing the stark interior of the hub. The strike team moved quickly, their boots silent against the metal floor. Lyra led the way, her blaster held steady as she navigated the labyrinthine corridors. Turret control is up ahead, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. Once we disable it, the others can move in. Ben followed her, trying not to think about the fact that they were walking into the heart of enemy territory. The tension was suffocating, every shadow a potential threat. They reached the turret control room without incident, and Lyra motioned for Ben to join her at the console. You're up. Ben crouched beside the terminal, his hands flying over the alien interface. The system was complex, but he'd spent the last few days learning to decipher it. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he bypassed the security protocols. Almost there, he muttered, his fingers dancing across the screen. Suddenly, an alarm blared, red lights flashing along the corridor. Lyra cursed under her breath, her weapon snapping up. What happened? Ben stared at the console, his stomach sinking. I don't know. I didn't. The sound of approaching footsteps cut him off. Lyra shoved him behind the console, her blaster aimed at the door. Stay down. The door burst open and a squad of council enforcers stormed in, their weapons blazing. Lyra moved with lethal efficiency, taking down 2 of them before they could react. The rest of the strike team joined the fight, a chaotic firefight erupting in the cramped space. Ben huddled behind the console, his heart racing. He was no soldier, but he wasn't about to sit idly by. He grabbed a discarded weapon from one of the fallen enforcers and popped up just long enough to take a few shaky shots. Not bad for a mechanic, Lyra shouted, ducking behind cover as bolts of energy sizzled past. Thanks, Ben shouted back, though his hands were trembling. The team managed to overpower the enforcers, but the alarm continued to blare. Lyra's jaw tightened as she scanned the room. This was a setup. They knew we were coming. Ben frowned, his mind racing. Oh, we were careful, weren't we? Someone tipped them off, Lyra said, her eyes narrowing. But that doesn't matter now. We stick to the plan. With the turrets disabled, the rebel fleet advanced, engaging the hub's external defenses. Inside, Lyra and Ben led the team deeper into the station, heading for the communication core. The corridors were a battlefield, each step forward hard-won. By the time they reached the core, the team had been whittled down to half its original size. The room itself was enormous, dominated by a massive pulsating sphere of energy suspended in the center. Consoles and control panels lined the walls, their displays flickering with alien script. Plant the charges, Lyra ordered, covering the room's entrance as the team went to work. Ben crouched beside a console, his eyes scanning the data streaming across the screen. Something caught his attention, a transmission log marked with the council's insignia. Lyra, he called out, his voice urgent. You need to see this. She joined him, her eyes narrowing as she read the log. It's a trap. They've been monitoring rebel activity for weeks. Ben nodded, his throat dry. And they're not just targeting us. They've got plans to move on Earth sooner than we thought. Lyra's expression hardened, her gaze flicking to the pulsing core. Then we make sure they don't get the chance. The charges were set and the team began their retreat. The countdown had already begun, the charges ticking down to detonation. But the hub wasn't letting them go without a fight. Enforcers poured into the corridors, cutting off their escape. The firefight was brutal. Ben found himself fighting side by side with Lyra, his fear giving way to determination. For every step they gained, the enforcers pushed back twice as hard. We're not going to make it, one of the rebels shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Yes, we are, Lyra snapped, firing a precision shot that took down a heavy enforcer. Keep moving. Ben spotted an access hatch on the wall, a potential escape route. Lyra, over here. She followed his gaze, nodding sharply. Go. I'll cover you. Ben hesitated, but the look in her eyes left no room for argument. He scrambled into the hatch, the rest of the team following close behind. Lyra was the last to climb through, sealing the hatch behind her just as an explosion rocked the corridor. The team sprinted through the maintenance tunnels, the countdown ticking closer to 0. By the time they reached the docked shuttle, the entire hub was shaking, lights flickering wildly. Get us out of here. Lyra shouted as they piled into the shuttle. Ben didn't need to be told twice. He launched the shuttle, weaving through the chaos as the hub began to collapse. The charges detonated in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave propelling them forward. As they cleared the debris field, the rebel fleet regrouped, their comms buzzing with relief and victory. Lyra slumped into a seat, exhaustion etched into her features. Ben sat beside her, his hands still trembling. We did it. She nodded, her expression softening. Yeah, we did. But as the stars stretched out before them, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The spark of revolution. The rebel fleet hung in formation against the star-speckled void, battered but alive. The Council's communication hub was no more, its wreckage scattered across the system. The rebels had struck a blow that would echo through the galaxy, but victory was far from assured. Ben sat in the cockpit of Lyra's ship, staring out at the debris field. His hands were steady now, the adrenaline from the mission still coursing through his veins. Lyra entered, her steps purposeful despite the exhaustion that lined her face. You did good out there, she said, settling into the seat beside him. Ben gave a shaky laugh. I think didn't die is more accurate. That's a win in my book, she replied, smirking faintly. Then her expression turned serious. But we're not done. Destroying the hub bought us time, but the council won't let this go unanswered. Yeah, I figured, Ben said, leaning back in his chair. They're going to come after us with everything they've got. Lyra nodded, her gaze distant. And not just us. Earth will be their next priority. Ben swallowed hard. The thought of his home planet under siege made his chest tighten. He'd barely scraped by on the hub. How could Earth hope to stand against the Council's armada? The rebel leaders convened in the main hall of Orlan's freighter. The room was crowded with representatives from various factions, their voices rising in heated debate. Ben stood at the back with Lyra, feeling out of place but unwilling to leave. Orlan raised a hand, silencing the room. The destruction of the hub is a victory, but it's only the beginning. The Council won't sit idle, they'll strike back, and soon. They'll target Earth, Lyra said, stepping forward. It's their key to consolidating control in this sector. A reptilian rebel hissed in frustration. Earth? Why should we risk our forces for a backwater planet? Because Earth is more than a planet, Lyra replied, her voice sharp. It's a symbol. If the Council takes it, they'll use it to crush any resistance. But if we can defend it, we show the galaxy that they're not invincible. The room fell into tense silence. Orlan's violet eyes scanned the assembly. Lyra's right. Earth's survival could ignite a full-scale rebellion. But to stand a chance, we'll need allies and resources. And a miracle, someone muttered. Ben stepped forward before he could second-guess himself. We've got one thing they don't, he said, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. Humans? All eyes turned to him, skepticism etched on every face. Humans? The reptilian rebel scoffed. What can a species of primitives do against the Council? Ben met the alien's gaze. We're not primitives. We're survivors. You've seen what we can do when we're pushed to the edge. Give us a chance and we'll prove it. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression unreadable. Ben's right. Humanity has potential, but they'll need time and training. And we'll need to rally every ally we can find. Orlan nodded slowly. Then we split our forces. Some will fortify Earth while the rest spread the word. If we can unite the scattered factions, we might stand a chance. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation and uncertainty. The rebel fleet divided as planned, with Lyra and Ben leading the contingent bound for Earth. As the ship approached the planet, Ben felt a pang of homesickness. The sight of the blue and green sphere was both comforting and jarring, a reminder of the life he'd left behind. Lyra stood beside him, her expression thoughtful. It's beautiful, she said quietly. I can see why you fight for it. Ben smiled faintly. Yeah. It's not perfect, but it's home. They descended into Earth's atmosphere, landing in a remote desert where a small resistance base had been established. The rebels worked quickly to coordinate with human leaders, sharing technology and training their forces. For Ben, it was a surreal experience. He found himself teaching militia members how to operate alien weapons, explaining the intricacies of Council tactics. Despite the odds, the humans adapted quickly, their determination fueling their progress. The Council's retaliation came sooner than expected. Their fleet arrived in force, massive warships darkening the skies. Panic spread like wildfire, but the combined forces of the rebels and humanity stood their ground. The first wave of the assault was devastating. The Council's superior firepower overwhelmed the outer defenses, forcing the rebels to retreat toward the planet's surface. But the defenders fought fiercely, using guerrilla tactics to exploit their knowledge of the terrain. Ben found himself in the thick of the battle, his fear giving way to focus. He worked tirelessly, repairing damaged equipment and coordinating with the resistance. Lyra was a constant presence, her leadership galvanizing the defenders even in the face of overwhelming odds. The turning point came during a critical battle near a ruined city. The Council had deployed a massive siege engine, a towering machine bristling with weapons. It was tearing through the defenders, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Ben and Lyra led a desperate mission to disable the engine. They infiltrated its base under cover of darkness, their small team outnumbered and outgunned. The tension was suffocating as they navigated the labyrinthine interior, planting charges on its power core. As they prepared to escape, the engine's alarms blared. Council enforcers swarmed the corridors, cutting off their exit. Ben and Lyra fought side by side, their movements synchronized as they carved a path through the chaos. You go? Lyra shouted, covering Ben as he scrambled toward the exit. I'll hold them off. Ben hesitated, his instincts screaming to stay. But the look in Lyra's eyes left no room for argument. Don't you dare die on me, he said, his voice shaking. She smirked, her blaster firing. I'll try my best. Ben made it out just as the charges detonated, the explosion lighting up the night sky. The siege engine collapsed in a fiery heap, its destruction sending a ripple of hope through the defenders. The battle raged on for days, but the tide slowly turned. Inspired by the rebels' bravery and humanity's resilience, other factions began to join the fight. Smugglers, mercenaries, and even defectors from the Council's forces arrived to bolster the defenses. In the final confrontation, the combined fleet of rebels and allies engaged the Council's armada in Earth's orbit. It was a chaotic, brutal clash, but the defenders fought with everything they had. Ben found himself in the cockpit of a fighter, his nerves steadied by the knowledge that he was no longer alone. The Council's flagship, a colossal dreadnought, became the focal point of the battle. Lyra led a daring assault on its command center, cutting through its defenses with surgical precision. As the flagship fell, the remaining Council forces retreated, their morale shattered. In the aftermath of the battle, Earth stood battered but unbroken. The victory was a beacon of hope, inspiring uprisings across the galaxy. The Council's grip began to falter as more worlds joined the rebellion. Ben stood with Lyra on a hill overlooking the Resistance base, the sunrise painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Despite the exhaustion that weighed on him, he felt a flicker of pride. "We did it," he said, his voice quiet. Lyra nodded, her gaze distant. "This is just the beginning. The Council won't stop until they're defeated for good. Then we'll keep fighting," Ben said firmly. "Together." She turned to him, a rare smile softening her features. "Together." As the sun rose over a changed world, Ben felt the spark of something greater, a revolution that would shape the future of the galaxy. And he was ready to face it no matter what came next. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.